Robert Nozick's Anarchy, State, and Utopia, first published in 1974, is a critical text in political philosophy that addresses the nature of the state, the concept of individual rights, and the possible configurations of a just society. It responds primarily to John Rawls's A Theory of Justice, offering an alternative vision that champions libertarianism, individual rights, and minimal government. The work is a profound philosophical inquiry into the legitimacy of the state, the principles of justice, and the possibility of utopian living under a minimal state framework. 1. The nature of the state of nature, and minimalism. The opening argument of Anarchy, State, and Utopia challenges the commonly accepted idea of a large, coercive state as the ideal model of governance. Nozick begins with the concept of the state of nature, which has been a key topic in political philosophy since Hobbes, Locke, and Rousseau. The state of nature is imagined as a condition without an overarching authority where individuals must rely on themselves to protect their rights and property. Nozick critiques the night watchman state, or the minimal state that John Locke advocates. The minimal state, according to Nozick, should exist solely to protect individual rights, specifically the rights to life, liberty, and property, and must not interfere with individuals' voluntary exchanges or actions beyond that. Unlike other political theorists who have called for a more expansive state to correct social inequalities or provide social services, Nozick argues that any government action that extends beyond the protection of individual rights is unjust. This theory places a premium on individual autonomy and the sanctity of private property. Nozick's minimal state is a key component of his political theory. He believes that individuals should be free to pursue their own goals and values without interference from the government, as long as they do not infringe on the rights of others. His position is a radical defense of individual liberty and is rooted in a form of entitlement theory, which asserts that individuals are entitled to their holdings, property, wealth, as long as they were acquired through just means, such as voluntary transactions or rectification of past injustices. 2. The entitlement theory of justice. One of the core aspects of Nozick's philosophy is his entitlement theory, which directly contrasts with John Rawls' theory of justice as fairness. Rawls argues for the redistribution of wealth to ensure that society's least advantaged members are well off, suggesting that inequalities are only acceptable if they benefit the poorest. In contrast, Nozick rejects any theory of distributive justice that aims to equalize wealth. Instead, he proposes that justice in holdings, property, and wealth is determined by how they were acquired, rather than by their distribution in society. According to Nozick, there are three main principles that make up the entitlement theory. Justice in acquisition. This principle focuses on how individuals initially acquire property. For Nozick, an individual acquires property through their labor or through voluntary exchange. Any property that is justly acquired is theirs, and they are entitled to keep it as long as it was obtained without violating others' rights. Justice in transfer. This principle concerns how property is transferred between individuals. If a person voluntarily gives their property to someone else, then the transfer is just. Nozick strongly emphasizes that property rights must be respected in all voluntary exchanges, and that any state-imposed redistribution violates this principle. Rectification of injustice. If someone has acquired property unjustly, or if there has been a violation of someone's rights, e.g. theft, fraud, then the state must intervene to rectify the situation. However, Nozick argues that any attempt to redistribute wealth in a broad sense, such as through welfare programs, constitutes a form of coercion that is inconsistent with individual rights. Thus, Nozick's theory stands in stark opposition to the idea of redistributive justice. Whereas Rawls advocates for a more equitable distribution of wealth and resources, Nozick asserts that as long as individuals have obtained their holdings justly, any interference with their property is unjust. The problem of patterned theories. A central critique in Nozick's book is aimed at what he calls patterned theories of justice, such as Rawls's theory. Pattern theories attempt to ensure a particular distribution of goods in society based on some principle, for instance, equal distribution or distribution according to need. Nozick challenges these theories arguing that they are inherently unjust because they require constant interference with individual rights to maintain a desired outcome. In his famous Wilt Chamberlain argument, Nozick presents a thought experiment to illustrate this critique. Suppose that society has adopted a pattern of distribution in which everyone has an equal amount of wealth. However, individuals voluntarily pay to watch a basketball game, and in the process, one player, Wilt Chamberlain, accumulates a large sum of money. According to the patterned theory, this unequal distribution is unjust because it deviates from the original pattern. Nozick argues, however, that the accumulation of wealth by Chamberlain is entirely just because it was the result of voluntary transactions. He concludes that any attempt to redistribute wealth to restore the original pattern requires unjust interference with individual freedoms. This argument leads to Nozick's conclusion that no distributional principle can be just unless it accounts for the voluntary actions of individuals. He emphasizes that justice must be based on the process by which holdings are acquired and transferred, rather than the end result of distribution. Number 4. The concept of utopia, a society of utopian communities. The final part of Nozick's book addresses the idea of a utopian society. Nozick challenges traditional utopian ideals that often call for a singular, perfect society for all people. Instead, he envisions a system in which multiple, diverse utopian communities can exist under the umbrella of a minimal state. In this vision, the state provides the basic protections necessary for individuals to live their lives freely but does not impose any specific conception of the good life. Nozick suggests that individuals should be free to form their own communities based on their values and desires. These communities would be self-organized and governed according to the principles that their members agree upon. This idea is an attempt to reconcile the principles of individual autonomy with the desire for a flourishing society. Nozick's utopia, then, is not a single homogeneous community, but a system of many different communities that coexist and respect each other's freedom. The vision of multiple utopian communities is consistent with Nozick's broader commitment to individual freedom and the non-interference of the state. He argues that the state should be neutral with respect to the good life, allowing individuals to determine for themselves what constitutes a fulfilling and meaningful existence. Number 5. Nozick's critique of the welfare state. One of the book's most controversial claims is its critique of the welfare state. Nozick argues that any form of welfare or redistributive taxation is a violation of individual rights because it involves the forcible taking of property from one person to give to another. He views welfare programs as a form of coercion that infringes on individuals' rights to the fruits of their labor. This critique places Nozick squarely in the libertarian camp, rejecting the notion that the state has any responsibility to provide for the welfare of its citizens beyond the protection of their rights. For Nozick, the state's only legitimate function is to maintain the basic legal framework that ensures justice in acquisition and transfer, as well as the rectification of injustice. He strongly opposes any effort to use the state as a tool for wealth redistribution or social engineering, seeing it as a threat to individual liberty. Anarchy, State, and Utopia remains one of the foundational works in libertarian political philosophy. Nozick's defense of individual rights, limited government, and the entitlement theory of justice has had a significant impact on political theory, especially in the context of debates about the role of the state and the distribution of resources. His arguments against redistribution and pattern theories of justice have sparked extensive debate, particularly in relation to issues like social justice, welfare, and the moral legitimacy of the state. However, Nozick's theory is not without its criticisms. Some argue that his rejection of redistributive justice fails to account for systemic inequalities and historical injustices. Critics also challenge his minimal state as being too idealistic, arguing that a truly minimal state may be unable to address the complex needs of modern societies. Despite these critiques, Anarchy, State, and Utopia continues to be a central text in political philosophy, offering a powerful defense of individual liberty and the principles of a minimal state. In sum, Nozick's work presents a compelling vision of a society based on the protection of individual rights, voluntary cooperation, and minimal government intervention. His theory remains a significant contribution to the ongoing debate about the nature of justice, the role of the state, and the possibilities for creating a just society.